All right, everyone, we should be live. Let's make sure that's actually the case over on Rumble. Of course, I believe that we are. A bunch of people waiting. Chat is working, so that's always a good indicator. D Thomas125, tranny shit is a distraction. JS Fugi, ScrewTube fanboys can stay over there. To hell with ScrewTube. Buddy Mac 13 says boo. And Bana Layman says good morning and clank. Yes, indeed. We'll see if we're live, though. I'm hoping that we are. Makes it a lot easier on me when I'm not talking to myself or the fake cat over here. Yes, indeed, we are live over on Rumble. Plenty of stuff going on today. We've got Mark Rutte, actually the Prime Minister of the nation I'm currently residing in. He's called it quits. He seems to be genuinely out. He's basically forsaking politics entirely at this point, saying, fuck it, basically. I've got my pension. Everything's okay. Who gives a damn? And a lot of Dutch people, I think, are probably happy to see him go because, I mean, he had alienated elements of his own coalition. I'll get into the reasons why. It actually has nothing to do with like the tractor protests or anything like that. It has to do with mass migration. And that's how he managed to alienate even members of his own party. A little bit like Joe Biden right now with cluster munitions. We'll be talking about that actually as well. And also, we've got Biden on the beach and some other shit that we've got to cover. And it's going to be a fun time. So, yeah. Just a second here. Why is this tab not working? One of my tabs isn't loading properly. We'll refresh it. I know there are a million flies around here. It's unstoppable. I'm going to look like Hillary Clinton in the Democratic debate, I suppose. Okay, now it loaded. That's better. Anyway, also at the top of chat, if you're watching on YouTube or cross-platform, of course, YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter, link in the description to where you can find my books. I actually have my books blog listed there. More titles will be coming down the pipeline soon. I've completed 13 more. They're ready for illustrating. And the last one, actually, that I planned for the year, actually, is almost edited. So we'll be having a lot of books, as well as about a half a dozen titled works. I got a few more ideas over the last couple of weeks, and I formatted and outlined those as well, including one on what to expect if alien life is ever found on another planet or if it interacts with Earth at all. Of course, I don't believe that'll be the case. Don't worry, that will be an aside in that particular work. I'm interested in the topic, though, exoplanets and aliens and so forth. It's fun. Have a little fun in life. Stop being so boring. Branch out. Become an occultist. That's the way to do it. Anyway, we're going to get right into the news. Mark Rutte is his cabinet collapsed some days ago, and he's incapable of governing, and so he's decided to call it quits. He's decided to resign. He will no longer, effective, I believe, immediately actually be Prime Minister of the Netherlands. In fact, I'm not even sure he's holding on as caretaker, actually. It's not 100% sure in all of the reporting, so don't jump down my throat if I'm wrong about that one. But he is going to be on his way out. He's now saying that he doesn't even want to be in politics anymore, which you can't blame the dude. His approval is fairly low for a reason. Part of that reason being he's alienated elements of his own support base. I predicted that this would happen in multiple European nations some time ago. This is pre-Brexit that I predicted this. What's happening in Europe, and to an extent the United States, and we'll see where that goes because right now it's on shaky ground. What's happening in Europe is that the old vanguard of the what we could call traditional center-right conservative parties and traditional center-left liberal parties no longer really hold sway. The problem is that the political blocs are out of line with the population, often because they are older. It's really about age demographics in part. You've got people who are 20, 30 years older in many cases in many political movements around the world. This is definitely the case in the United States. There it's more than 20. It's more like 40. You've got politicians that tend to be from generations past. So they're boomers, they're silent gen, etc. Or even Gen X at this point. Older Gen X would, I think, qualify. They're different from the average person in the public as far as the demographics. And the problem is that, therefore, because they get stuck in their ways, they prioritize different things. The problem is that the older generation holds to the concept that anything out of that center-left, center-right paradigm is bad. We see this in Germany, certainly. I can talk about that briefly. I think they're going to have a Weimar moment, actually. Or here in the Netherlands, certainly in the United States, the same holds true. Canada is another example. France, actually, with Le Pen and others. What's happened is that people don't like the status quo. So the decadence of the late nuclear era, sort of like the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the general wealth and general feeling of prosperity among most of the public. And some of you don't have that feeling because you are poor, and some of you don't have any stressful feelings about the way things are going because you're wealthy. For the average person, middle class, lower or upper, doesn't really matter. The vast corpus of the people from the working class up through the upper echelon of the upper class, the working rich, as you would call them, physicians and lawyers and so forth. A significant proportion of them do not see the way that policy is going as a positive one. So they don't see the economy necessarily as good. They don't see the culture necessarily as appropriate, as something that they support, et cetera, et cetera. They got social alienation. This is the bulk of the public. The poor will always be reliant upon the government teat. The people at the very top will always be rich. It doesn't matter what the differential is there. Everyone in the middle, so 70, 80% of your population, it depends on the nation, of course, and how affluent it is and what the inequality index would be, feel alienated. In yesteryear's times, a significant proportion of them felt fine. The majority of the population felt fine. Reaganomic America. People in the lower middle class generally had a sense of optimism. The eras before that, eras after the Clintonian era, certainly. Now that's not the case. In the United States, what happened is it flipped over much more quickly because of the conceptualization of politics as it is in the United States. It's different from that's here in Europe. You don't have prime ministers and shit in the United States. Things flipped more quickly, and you see a Democratic Party struggling with, I think, a blue dog element a la like RFK Jr. on one hand and a far left movement on the other, but they're minor groups. And so the Democrats are clinging to their neoliberalism. And a GOP that largely was usurped by first the Tea Party, actually, like the Ron Paul, revolution movement, and then more recently by MAGA. And so you have, I think, an evening out, a normalization of politics, at least on that populist side, that are further out there, which is another reason I believe that MAGA has an advantage. You don't have that in parts of Europe. For example, only a year or two ago, the German government decided to start spying on one of its more right-leaning political parties, fearing them to be Nazis. This is exactly what happened, and I warned years ago when this happened, is exactly what happened in Weimar, Germany. In fact, one Adolf Hitler was initially a spy for the conservatives, I believe it was, to spy on the rise of the NSDAP, which at that point was an afterthought party. They had 300 members. And he was told to go in and spy on them, spy on their meetings and report back. And then he got indoctrinated, and the rest, of course, is history. Germany, I think, is making the same mistake again. I believe that France is making a similar mistake. The Macron clings to the neoliberal globalist order. The problem is the people are out of lockstep with the politicians. They don't see it as working the same way in which the politicians see it as working. But the politicians are all rich. The politicians tend to come from the upper crust. They are inevitably out of touch with the people. And if you end up with a workers' revolution, then they tend to come from the lower end proletariat because you've told them to hate the bourgeois. They're also out of step with the general population because the general population wants some degree of comfort. Both revolutionary sides tend to fail on this token. Establishmentarianism tends to fail because of those failures, ironically enough. And that's my analysis of that. So Mark Rutte is out. He's the face of what you could call marginal conservatism, I suppose. On this particular issue, the way in which he alienated people was he wanted further restrictions on migrants. It had nothing to do with tractor protests or any of this other stuff. And it was bogged down because he has a very, very, very narrow coalition that only really can govern with the will of at least a few people from parties that fucking hate him. It's in their political best interest to cock-block him and get him out of office. Well, they've succeeded at that. One warning I would issue is that Mark Rutte being out does not mean that the globalistic neoliberal seize the farms policies don't continue. They very likely will. They'll just continue with someone who doesn't have as much baggage, making it actually more formidable in the process. So this is a qualified victory in that sense, if you stand against the old centrism of, the dying embers of yesteryear in the United States, Canada, Europe, etc., then it's a victory. But it doesn't mean that the establishmentarians won't take lemons and make them into lemonade and attempt to hoodwink people. And so I can't really give more advice in the sense of the Dutch people, because, of course, I'm not originally Dutch at all. I'm from the United States. But Mark Rutte, personality-wise, I'll just say this. When I watch him speak, he's just a little bit off, if that makes sense. I think that probably I don't even need to understand what he's saying to say this is a dude that, to me, he seems a little bit Mike Pence-ish, a little bit weird in his delivery, in his personality. Just my own personal opinion. Perhaps I have better analysis of that than someone who speaks more fluent Dutch. Studied a little bit more of that earlier, actually. Had fun. Don't worry, I'm learning my vocab. That Manx guy, $5, no comment. Thank you very much. Opinionated junkie, John D. Rockefeller Jr. funded eugenics movements. Yes, ironically, the eugenics movement, technically speaking, was started in the proto-anthropological era at none other than the University of Vermont. I've literally been in the building where the first few meetings were held on that topic. Gerald Armstrong, there's a video on YouTube that contrasts Biden's beach clips and Trump's triumphant entrance at UFC 290. It was glorious. We'll be talking about Biden at the beach. The Patriot Cairo, if Trump wins 2024 and reviews the security video footage, do you think he will reveal whose cocaine it was to the public? Damn, that would be funny. Well, funny that video footage would be scrubbed before he took office if that happens. That's a guarantee, by the way. Opinionated junkie, Egyptian flag is Nazi German flag flipped. Yeah, although without the swastika on it, admittedly. AP1 S2K, happy year, sober, and new job. Pixie, can't wait to jump out of a plane with you again in 5 days. Also Clank, etc., etc. Please cuss a lot, too, for my $5. Well, bullshit fucking cunt. Thank you for the cunting $5. Tasmanaut, all clankers should go see Sound of Freedom. The attacks against it appear to be groomer adjacent. They also appear to be heavily astroturfed, I have noticed. The legacy media borrowing one another's headlines as usual. Ashley, Sticks is right. I've had middle-class millennials say they remember the good times and promises of upward mobility pre-2008. Now they're over 40. Yeah, I mean, I'm 35, and the American dream has been largely denied to people in this generation. I believe you should pay back your student loan debts. I believe in personal responsibility, and part of that is missing from the millennial upbringing. But it wasn't all our fault. To be clear, we were told if we studied good and we got a decent GPA and went to a reasonable school, fresh out of college, we could get a reasonable job that would pay the bills. Well, then the Great Recession hit. Most of us didn't get that. I didn't. I spent several years as a NEET, and by the way, felt bad about it and pulled myself up by my bootstraps. But that's not the typical story. The typical story isn't that a person is in the right place at the right time. It's like a 1 in 100 story that I've got. I happen to have the right set of skills at the right time, be interested in the right things, and that's why I succeeded. I don't think that trickles down to the average experience by a broke millennial. People that are 35, 40 fucking years old and they can't even make their student loan payments and they're still eating ramen. They're gonna have a lot of heart attacks, by the way. Stop with the ramen. Be better off if you just ate nothing but lettuce, honestly. Yeah, you'd be malnourished, but you'd still, honestly, probably live longer. Patty, DeSantis is doing a lot to block legalizing marijuana. Has attacked Trump for not being anti-gay. I'm supposed to believe he wins more independents? Yes, you are supposed to believe that. I've talked about the Kasich effect before, both in the 2016 election and recently with DeSantis. his name recognition is less. And so less people, honestly, for some people out there, everyone knows who Trump is. Everyone in the fucking world knows who he is. There are enclaves that don't know who DeSantis is. They haven't seen an ad. They're not maybe cued in fully to politics. If you ask them, hey, if it's DeSantis v. Biden, who would you vote for? And they say DeSantis, more often than not, it's because they don't know anything about him. They're like, well, Biden sucks, so this dude's got to be better. But then they become familiarized with the platform, and many of them drop back off the DeSantis drive-in. It is effectively the Kasich effect. Kasich, in 2016, and he was correct when he said this, John Kasich matched up the best against Hillary Clinton. He had the best matchup polling. It was better than Trump. It was better than Rubio. It was better than Cruz, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because people didn't know anything about him. They were just looking at Hillary saying they didn't like her, and so any alternative was better unless the alternative had already been propagandized against by the legacy media. It's the same thing. Scarfy the Strange. I'm tired of Republicans trying to put out right-wing Trump by being authoritarians and banning stuff. Yeah, let's ban marijuana, let's ban porn, let's ban, literally everything under the sun. Jesus will be the president of the United States, and our state interpretation of that religion, God damn it, will be the litmus test. That's a selling point for independent voters, by the way. Next news story. Biden defends difficult decision. It was very difficult for him to give Ukraine cluster bombs amid congressional pushback. Yes, even some Democrats right now are crucifying Joe Biden for the decision to give cluster munitions to the Ukrainians. I personally think it's inappropriate. It's unhelpful. There was a nasty spat the other day where Joe Biden came out, by the way, and a lot of people haven't seen this because most of the legacy media didn't pick up the story. Did you see that Joe Biden effectively admitted that the United States has a munitions shortage? Yes, he did. It's like, well, we're going to give them these cluster bombs. We don't have any more to give them, only a few systems. We'll be temporarily increasing our ability to create them because otherwise we won't be able to supply them as much. And so we had several gaffes really on this issue. The first is that Joe Biden effectively admitted that the United States is running low on munitions. Now, not the public, they've got plenty of ammunition, but the government, the regulars, so to speak, they're running low on stuff to supply the Ukrainians with, possibly because we're sending it all to the Ukrainians and not keeping any aside for ourselves. It's been how much has been spent now? It's well over $100 billion. Imagine how many homeless people you could shelter for that same period of time for the same cost if we weren't blowing the shit out of random people over in Eastern Europe, by the way. That was number one. And so now there's going to be more cluster munitions made. And number two, he's come out, and at the same contemporary time, he says, well, I don't think Ukraine's ready to join NATO. One of the few intelligent things that Joe Biden has actually done or said. See, the problem is that if you were to admit Ukraine to NATO and they're at war, that would be a problem. Thankfully, there's actually part of the chaptering of NATO itself prevents you from adding a country that's under current invasion to the alliance. Not without good reason, because it's probably being invaded by a nuclear state. And so Ukraine literally can't join. And Biden pointed out, well, we need to settle this issue first. His idea, though, of settling it is to send these indiscriminate cluster munitions to Ukraine. I pointed out the other day, here's the problem. And the Russians have been using cluster munitions sporadically, but they have used them. And they've been condemned for using them. Over 100 countries in this world have condemned their usage and banned it outright. Their militaries don't possess or deploy these weapons. Some of them, by the way, are not Western Bloc states. Some of them are, which is actually even more concerning as far as U.S. foreign policy is concerned. We're saying that Russia bad because they use these weapons. So why in God's name would we deploy them? Why would we allow a third-party state to deploy them? If you're going to claim that another person is bad for doing something, and then you do fucking the same thing, that makes you a hypocrite. Hypocrisy is not well received diplomatically on the world stage, by the way, but Biden doesn't understand anything about diplomacy, not with any part of the world. The only thing he can do is he can go to Britain right now, where he literally is, I think, physically at the moment, to talk to Sunak and others and beg them for their understanding. I'm sorry, I know that the UK doesn't use cluster munitions because a kid 50 years from now might dig up the bomb and blow his leg off. But hey, this is an extenuating circumstance because Putin man bad. It's a pile of fucking horseshit. I'm completely against this war. Russia's wrong. The United States is wrong. Fucking everybody's wrong. Zelensky's a strong man, the same as Putin anyway. He just happens to be there when the invasion happens. That doesn't make him an archangel or anything like that. Doesn't make him some highly religious savior-like figure. It makes the Ukrainian people goddamn abused and literally nothing more. I feel sorry for them. I don't feel sorry for anyone else in this fucking fight. And deploying cluster munitions to fire, and this has been pointed out, at fleeing Russian forces is not going to go over so well. Like as not, the Russians will grab a hold of some of that stock anyway, or they'll be sold on the black market. It's a clusterfuck. As wars the United States tends to get involved in tend to be, but there are still people out there who will castigate you as being pro-Putin if you are simply anti-war. Well, my views haven't changed. I've been through Iraq, I've been through Afghanistan, I've been through the intervention in Syria, the overthrow of Libya, the attempted overthrow of Egypt and Tunisia, and much, much more. I've never been in favor of any of these engagements. That's because they're stupid, and we tend to lose them. And all that ends up happening is that people end up dying, many of them civilians, and everyone is more miserable in the world. I can't see what the fuck we're accomplishing. That's the whole point. Oh, Russia has rolled in? Well, I mean, that's terrible. But they're not in NATO. They're not part of any defensive sphere that we have formed. You can feel sorry for the people and try to help them in any way you can, but sending cluster munitions, a few hundred units, by the way, of them, what the fuck is that going to do against a Russian invasion anyway? Supposedly, the Ukrainians are kicking ass. I keep hearing on the news that the Ukrainians are not only holding their own, but making steady progress. Pretty soon, they'll be on the footsteps of Moscow, ready to knock Putin on his ass. Well, if that's true, then why do they need the cluster bombs? Fucking horse shit. Aussie's Robots, happy Monday, Sticks and Clankers. There's a reason there's a 1%. Times have been tough since the dawn of civilization. Rely on yourselves and you'll be fine. Exactly. There will always be haves and have-nots, and there's nothing that we can do about it. There is no system ever instituted that takes care of this problem. On the local level, a very tight-knit community, tending to be theocratic in nature, like the Amish, can compensate. But that's not a proper way to organize a larger society. It's just impossible. The logistics make it impossible. What we should be doing is making sure at the very least the people at the very bottom have enough so that they're not fucking starving to death, because that's not great, and that the people at the top have a rudimentary understanding at least of the plight of the people at the bottom, so maybe there's some sympathy shown. You know, Christmas Carol style. Project Masculinity, Thulu for President 2024. Yes. I promise that I will eat the whole world. Steve Watt, sending 100 Australian dollars, by the way. Thank you very much. Look after the farmers and toil the soil. Love your new t-shirt, Sticks, and I like oil. Thank you. I like this t-shirt as well. Yeah, farming is pretty cool. The Dutch farmers must be chuckling right now about Mark Rutte bowing out of politics forever, even though it had nothing to do with the reason. I mean, he would have hard-lined them forever, continuing to try to steal their land. It was because of migrants. He cares more about them than he does the farmers, apparently. Samantha Winter. Hey, Sticks, I just saw CNN put out another hottest temperature on record story again. By the way, are you worried about the world running out of fossil fuel? No, I'm not worried at all. And I didn't see that from CNN, but it doesn't surprise me. I believe that oil is produced biotically in the Earth's crust by bacteria, specifically archaebacteria, extremophiles. They gobble up radiation, they partake in chemical processes, the decomposition of rock, etc. And where water is also present, it's generally good for life, they eat, and then they excrete. And that excretion slowly builds up over time as a biofilm, which is slowly compacted by seismic activity, filling areas of porous soil or empty caverns, potentially, with an oily substance that slowly, over the course of a very long time, is refined. It ain't running out. And the crust of the Earth is thick enough, and there are enough biological life forms down there to create all the oil that is necessary for surface life to continue in an industrial capacity. I don't think that we'll run out of oil. Natural gas is created as an offshoot. Coal isn't. Coal appears to be the bioaccumulation of herbaceous matter closer to the surface, and in swampy areas it gets compacted, turns kind of into a rock. Of course, things like peat, those aren't renewable, they are slowly, but wood is renewable. We can always use wood power. Some hippie trippy folks out there create wood pellets for stoves for a reason. They've got it. Not necessarily the most efficient methodology, but yeah, if you want to feel like you're doing something without doing something. Matthew Hammond, the ammunition shortage is compounded by the Obama administration that allowed U.S. domestic steel to be destroyed by Chinese subsidized steel. Yeah, of course. He knew who his masters were. There's a reason that they compared Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. There's another character in that same series called Tigger that they always said that Obama looked like. What does Tigger sound like? There might be a slur involved here, but I'll hold off judgment because we all know that they're so politically correct in Han China. Not a bad account. Will Trump respect the election when ballots for his opponent arrive overnight in the next few days? That's how a functioning democracy works. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to the election to see what crazy shit happens and how far people can be perturbed before they do something. OMG puppies, what do you think about PBD podcast? Their interview with Colonel McGregor seemed like a clear discussion of the Ukraine conflict, radically different from MSM narrative. PBD, I don't know which one that is, actually. 10 million comments, billion super chats. Sal the Hamster is now a monthly supporter over on Rumble. Thank you very much. Again, I have no clue how that support system works. I've never seen an option to join anyone's channel. Swamp Donkey, but we don't have the funds to build the wall. We have spent enough money on Ukraine to have built 10 walls. Exactly. Congress stonewalled for 2.5 years on the wall funding for a much, much smaller amount than what we've given Ukraine in 3 or 4 different episodic releases of money. Why didn't we use that for something that would benefit our nation? King of Biltong, good morning from Antons in Roanoke, Texas. I'd like to thank Clankers Joseph, Renee, and Lane for popping in this weekend. Remember your free shipping with code STICKS, #ClankNation. Thank you very much. I will send more Clankers your way for their meat. Get some Biltong. Chew it down. Chortle it. Swamp Donkey, when the people who run everything don't come from your nation, ethnic group, culture, have dual loyalty, and openly hate the people who made the nation, it's actually against YouTube's TOS to make comparisons between people in certain animalia. They are takers from society and nothing more. We're going to George Carlin that ship. We're going to make soft language. Veteran Biker, what software do you use to stream to multiple platforms? I just use StreamYard. It's straightforward. You pay a small monthly fee. You can stream, to 3 different sites, which is what I'm doing. And it's a no-brainer. And it works with Opera now, actually. They've fixed their shit. I don't have to use Chrome anymore if I want to share a screen. Next news story, Sington reporting here, of course, he's an apologist for Biden. A shirtless President Biden spends the day at a Delaware beach, completely unnoticed by other beachgoers. Now, we'll peel this apart. Firstly, I don't actually care that Biden went to the beach. I realize that there are some people saying, oh, you've got a cocaine scandal in the White House. We got all sorts of problems. How dare you go and sunbathe for a couple of hours? I actually take up the opposite tack. I don't give a shit. I care about much of what Biden does, much of it wrong. I care about attacks on the Second Amendment. I care about attacks on freedom of speech. I care about the fact that he has attempted to pass multiple EOs and bills that have run afoul of constitutional query. I care that he's demented. I care that he's infirm. And that is somewhat evident in this particular clip as you watch it. Link in the description, of course. He does, he's 80. So, he has some physical issues. He's not the sprightly young lad of 60 that he used to be. I care about many of the things that Joe Biden has done wrong. Him going to the beach for a couple of hours, I'm sorry to say, ain't among it. So if you want the outrage mob takes, there's plenty of hyperbolic channels that will discuss in minute detail how terrible what he's doing is. This ain't going to be the one. One thing that I would say is rather funny, though, is that he's capable of going to a beach and nobody even fucking says hi. Now, this is Joe Biden. This is Rehoboth Beach. This is his own stomping ground. So some people probably hold back because they know who he is. So these are largely people that are in the upper echelon or above, and they know who Joe is. And they're like, oh, thank God for old Joe getting rid of Orange Man. I don't want to bother the dude, though, because he's fucking 80 years old and he just wants to suntan. And also, those Secret Service agents over there have fucking Uzis. I can understand that. But not a single person appears to have even noticed who he was. It is entirely possible that a large number of people there did not know that he was the president of the United States. That was a dumb idea, kitty cat, which I find hilarious. If Trump goes to a beach, all of a sudden everyone either starts protesting or asking him for an autograph. It is the exact opposite with Sleepy Joe. That's really the only take that I have on this. I'm not going to ridicule the dude for wanting to get a suntan. The fact that he's hunched over and walking slowly, okay, he's shuffling across the sand. When you get 80, you'll probably do the same thing. Joe Biden is not fit for office. He's not fit mentally and he's not fit physically. He is corrupt. He is engaged in multiple national and international crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors. He is engaged in multiple impeachable offenses, and he's weaponizing the bureaus even more than they were under previous administrations to go after political dissidents as well as his mainline opponent from the GOP. I got plenty of complaints about Creepy Joe. Him going to the beach is the least of my concerns. This is a 0.5 out of 10 on the I give a damn about it scale. I'm not going to try to lie to my audience here. I'm not going to lie to several thousand people and pretend that this is particularly compelling. Nonetheless, it went completely viral. Liberals were covering for him. Conservatives were pretending that it was the worst thing ever. Oh my God, how dare he go on vacation now? Even the Republican Party at large was like, well, Biden has spent however many days it was on vacation. In full admission, Donald Trump was not exactly a workhorse if you count days that he supposedly spent on vacation now. The fact that he's at the Mar-a-Lago doesn't mean he's golfing. The fact that Joe Biden is at Rehoboth Beach doesn't mean that he's going suntanning. By the way, he could be working in a more informal setting. Camp David is set up for this, for example. We don't know what proportion of those days were technically work days at all. You know, a general might fly down from D.C. to the Mar-a-Lago or go to Rehoboth Beach just in order to inform the sitting steward or president of whatever of what's going on. Anyway, I don't care about this, and I'm not going to pretend to care. It's funny, okay, doddering Joe. Nobody gives a shit that he's there, Joe. That's funny. That's amusing. That's the only reason why I'm even, by the way, fucking talking about this, by the way. As far as his vacation days, not compelled. Don't care. I don't care. In fact, if anything, imagine this. Joe Biden goes on a vacation for the rest of his term. He refuses to work at all. He simply goes sunbathing and bicycle riding and eating his fucking ice cream spiked with, laxatives, of course, so he can have his bowel movement. That'd be the best thing for the country. Please, Joe, go back to the beach as often as possible. If it's cold weather, don't worry. There's a state called Texas, and you can go down to the Rio Grande Valley to South Padre, and you can go and sunbathe down there. The water will still be 75 degrees in the middle of winter, so you won't have anything to worry about. I think it would be the best thing ever. Joe Biden goes on a vacation for a year and a half. Totally excellent. It's not like you're calling the shots anyway, so it doesn't. What the fuck does this change? It doesn't make any difference. In all honesty, who cares? Funny, but not really meaningful. Newsworthy because of its humor. DO7JJ. Sticks, have you heard? The local police in Florida will not follow HB 269? Lol. Well, I mean, it's constitutionally spurious. So yeah, if DeSantis doesn't get his way on jailing people for putting up billets that happen to accidentally wander onto private property and offend the property owner, yeah, I think that's a good thing. Richard III. Didn't DHS buy 1 billion rounds of ammo some time ago? They do this every other year, actually. Seems an odd purchase. Are they expecting to need that much? Federal bureaus purchase ammo all the time. There were stories back in the 2000s when I was mainly operating, by the way, on Facebook about the IRS and similar groups buying up a shit ton of ammo. Now, you do have enforcement arms of these bureaus. I just think they shouldn't exist. They should have to work through other law enforcement. They should not be able to arm up because it's not necessary for tax collectors to be armed. Ozzy's robots, legacy media, tech, movies in decline, losing influence and audience. Beyond censoring, what does the deep state do next to respond? People have woken up. They censor more. They double down on their failed policies as they usually have in the past. And Swamp Donkey. Biden was lucky to visit that beach. In the next few years, it'll be underwater. Don't you know, Sticks? Climate change. Paraphrasing Russ. Yes, exactly. Enjoy Rehoboth Beach while you can because it won't exist in 10 years. I mean, Biden probably won't either. He's getting up there in the category of dementia, and unfortunately, it's progressing at a relatively rapid pace. So, next news story. Ukraine admits to Crimea bridge blast while Russia again shuts down traffic over cruise missile. Yeah, you remember when the Kerch Strait bridge was bombed many, many moons ago? And the Western legacy media immediately said, well, the Russians probably did it. They did it to retaliate in some manner. The Russians did it, or potentially third-party saboteurs. They did it just out of spite, basically, or a false flag attack, actually. Same as with Nord Stream. And sane people at the time pointed out that wasn't a really very likely scenario. It made more sense that Ukraine was involved. In the case of Nord Stream, the U.S. Obviously was the big potential player involved. We're still not 100% sure, but there's good reason to believe the U.S. was the one that destroyed Nord Stream. There was always good reason to believe that the Ukrainians were the ones that destroyed the Kerch Bridge. Well, now they've effectively owned up to it. It's not a full admission, like Zelensky didn't come out and say this, but high enough up. Anna Malayer, Ukraine's deputy defense minister, said in a statement on Telegram that it has been 273 days since Ukrainians struck the first blow on the Crimean Bridge in order to break the logistics of the Russians. I'd say that's pretty reliable. Oh, deputy defense minister. Well, if she doesn't get gulagged in the next 72 hours, we'll know that it's true, I suppose. Dennis the Menace, the water is warm everywhere in Texas this summer. So yeah, I mean, some people were called conspiracy theorists for suggesting that Ukraine could possibly be the one striking that bridge because they recognize Crimea as their own territory, and why on earth would they do so? Well, it turns out they probably did it. Much like Nord Stream was probably done by the United States, which was prefaced on Biden effectively bragging about the capability of the United States to do something like that, which certainly it does. And it's very interesting because I think I got called a conspiracy theorist a couple of times for pointing out that nobody else really had any reason to blow the bridge other than the Ukrainian forces. Doesn't mean you dislike the Ukrainian people. It means that you recognize that their government is run by crazy people right now. Let's strike deep within the heart of a nuclear nation. Yeah, it's disputed land, but for all intents and purposes, it belongs to them. Let's destroy a big bridge. That'll be a great time. Yeah, baby. And it totally won't antagonize the native population to mobilize more or anything like that. Yeah, right now, so many U.S. politicians, it was funny because there are elements of the GOP right now that are pro-cluster munitions. And then there's actually a bunch of Democrats that are standing against their own party's head, Joe Biden, on the issue. Everything's gone topsy-turvy in the last couple of days. The news cycle is nuts right now. Hence my high-energy takes. I only had one serving of caffeine this morning, and I'm still feeling lit. Wait till later. I'll be shitposting on Twitter all night, I'm sure. Next news story. I would like to point this out. I'm going to cut apart an argument here. It's a pro-anti-gun argument. By Samuel Schwartz. I know that's nobody that most of you have probably heard of, but I'm going to outline it anyway. It's the worst anti-gun argument I've ever heard, in other words. I'm not arguing for the abolition of the Second Amendment as a whole. I'm simply saying that amendments are not without their limits. For example, the First Amendment protects the right to free speech, among other forms of expression. You are correct, by the way, so far. However, not all forms of speech are protected. Libel, slander, sedition, and hate speech are all unprotected forms of speech. You are incorrect about hate speech. That is a protected form of speech. The judiciary does not recognize that term, but we'll give you an aside on that one because you're right about slander. You'd be right if you had said terroristic threats. I'll throw that in with sedition or something. Technically, you're right on those. Why? Because they harm other Americans and put the country at risk. Absolutely. bringing us to the apples and oranges comparison here. By the way, Gun Rights, How to Win That Debate. That book is still available on the blog. Again, link at the top in chat, link in the description cross-platform. You should go and get a copy if you haven't already. The Gun Rights Debate, How to Win It. I cover things like this because this is a very easily debunked argument. If you just use a little bit of mental wherewithal, it's easy to see where he's going and why he's wrong. The same can be said for the Second Amendment. Assault weapons are being used to gun down and slaughter Americans because mass shooters know how effective they are. They have been used in the 7 deadliest mass shootings in the last decade. Because of the extreme danger they put Americans in, assault weapons should not be a protected type of weapon under the Second Amendment. Now, let me tell you why this is apples to oranges. Other than hate speech, which actually is protected speech, so he's wrong on that, we'll just nullify that. As far as things like sedition, libel / slander, defamation in the more general sense, terroristic threats, other forms of non-protected speech, what is the reason why you can prosecute a person? It's not because they spoke. It's not because they gave an opinion. It's not for the speech at all. It's for the pragmatic fallout effect of that speech. You have encouraged other people to violence, potentially causing it towards another person. You've put another person in legit fear of their lives, their limb, their safety, their property, etc. You have claimed falsehoods about another person, causing them to suffer some sort of financial loss. And unfortunately, defamation laws tend to be tied to proving that there was a loss because of the defamation. I think that they should probably revert back to simply saying somebody attempted to cause you financial loss, and so you should get reparations from them for that. I think that the threshold should be lowered. Be great for content creators. Boy, oh boy, I'd be a multimillionaire if all the times people defamed me online publicly, some of which I have archived, by the way. If I didn't have to prove damages, I'd be robbing them blind left and right. Be a great time for yours truly, and I would probably buy a bunch of guns with some of that money. Here's the actual counterpart. It wouldn't be the type of weapon. It would be the usage of the weapon. So if your words cause harm to another person, you can be prosecuted for that. Well, if you shoot another person unjustly, you can be prosecuted for that. Okay. Your words, whether accidental or not, accidental shooting would be treated. It wouldn't necessarily be prosecuted. The sentence might not be the same, but the same principle applies. Credible threat of violence, so terroristic threats. That would be like aiming a gun at a person. I may not intend to shoot them whatsoever. I'm just trying to intimidate them, or I'm trying to be a tough guy. I'm still probably going to jail. Why? Because I credibly threatened another person. I just aimed a fucking firearm at them. Apples to oranges. It has nothing to do with the type of gun because all guns fundamentally serve that same purpose, just as all forms of speech serve the same purpose of communication. It doesn't matter because one sort of speech is different from another categorically. Political speech versus educational speech. Well, we need a different First Amendment litmus test. This would be like claiming that different categories or subgenres of speech require different policing and different grades, different variants of threshold to prove damages for defamation or to prove that it was actually a threat or something. But that's not the case. Apples to oranges comparison. So as simple as that. I wanted to point this out because I see so many fucking dumb arguments for gun control in the United States, and wrote a literal booklet on the subject. And I thought this was a great example. In fact, if I ever were to make a second edition, I might literally include this tweet verbatim in there and pick it apart for 4 or 5 pages. That would be epic. Maybe I should. The Patriot Cairo, linguistic propaganda alert. The term controversial is used in MSM as an adjective when describing anyone who disagrees with the woke narrative. Yes, and also it's often astroturf. The idea is that you claim that something is controversial even if it's not. Nobody really cares about it, has any strong opinions, but you claim it's controversial. There's controversial surgery on people's fingernails. Well, yeah, that 5 people had. It's some, like Zoomer meme or something like that. Nick Severance. Sticks, I'm not gay, but you are one sexy SOB, lol. Live in Maine and gotta love New England. Been watching your content for years. Love you, man. Well, thank you very much. Maine being basically a giant swamp, but you've got Stephen King. Doesn't that make you feel great that he lives up there? I'm sure that it does. Rusty Shackelford. Yo, Sticks. Hi from Cedarville, New Jersey. We vacation in Vermont. Manchester is our spot to stay, and we travel around the state. Love Dorset Quarry, Queechee, Peru, Mount Mansfield, and the tiny Rutland Walmart. Can't wait to go back. Manchester being probably the best of those areas. Queechy is like a bunch of second homers. And Rutland is, well, Rutland. So I'm probably not resettling back there, to be clear. I'm probably going to be going to New Hampshire instead. Publius Valerius Publicola. Well, the Second Amendment was penned after Lexington and Concord, where the British seized the privately owned cannons. It actually only protects the right of private citizens to own weapons of war. Yeah, exactly. But when we see takes like this, we have to give them nuance, because otherwise we're not going to be able to convince them, or third parties, that still are, fence riding. You have to be persuasive. Next news story. Farmer owes $82,000 in contract dispute over use of a thumbs up emoji, judge says. I would like to calm you down for a moment. Don't worry, you're not going to get sued for using a thumbs up emoji. I wanted to give an example of a form of legacy media propaganda. This is clickbait number one, because, people see this story and like, oh, wow, that sounds like a real wild thing. A judge is allowing a person to pay tens of thousands of dollars because they sent an emoji. I got to read that fucking story, and then they'll actually read it to the end. But probably not, because it still went viral. Here's what actually happened. An individual was supposed to make a flax shipment, and they were communicating with a company that was awaiting the flax. And the company alluded to finalizing a contract, and the individual posted the thumbs up emoji, which he says means something different from the people he was dealing with. He's been sued successfully for $82,000. Why? Because the individuals he was communicating with took that as a sign that he had agreed to the contract. Yes, I will ship the flax. But he didn't ship the flax, because the thumbs up emoji, according to him, was simply an acknowledgement that he had received the contractual statements that were being made. They weren't agreed to. And so he told the judge, there's no reason for me to ship the flax. I didn't say yay or nay that I was going to ship anything. All I did was confirm receipt. I've done this before using emojis. The problem is that the judge decided that the plaintiffs were correct. A reasonable person in the case would say, okay, this is effectively agreeing to the situation, and you didn't ship it, so you ended up shipping it to other people, so you owe them that money because they never got their delivery, and they needed that delivery. So be careful if you are communicating with someone for legal contract purposes related to an NDA, purposes related to a shipment of goods, purposes related to diplomacy. I'm sure this happens in the Biden White House at this point. They probably communicate with emojis because Joe can't understand basic human language anymore. Be careful about using emojis, so you might get sued. My thoughts, though, are if you read the article, it's kind of mundane. It's interesting, I guess, a little bit, but it's interesting on the level that, like, it should be local news. Like, it was interesting back when I was a kid in Vermont. There was a case where there was a moose that was seduced by a cow on a farm, actually. I can't remember what year this was. I think it was mid-2000s. And it was a big story locally and regionally. In New England, it was found hilarious because there was this moose. He was coming by and fucking the cow, and was mated to her, basically. Was the partner of this cow. It later died, I believe. And but does that make it international news? Does that make it worth putting on CNN Business? I mean, I know that you're a tabloid rag with declining standards, but you got to have some standards, even if they have declined. It was a funny story at the time. The moose is fucking the cow. Of course, they wouldn't say that on the news in front of the younger audience like myself. But the cow and the moose were dating and staying together and grazing together, and it was considered hilarious. But it's not really major news. It's interesting to the point of, hey, people in the locality will find it funny. Maybe people in upstate New York and Maine, places where there are a lot of moose. With this, it's funny. Who gives a fucking shit? It's basically a cut and dry legal story. Effectively, the idea of the court was, hey, if we find on behalf of the defendant, we're effectively insinuating the actual definition of emojis, like their literal interpretation, and it's impossible legally for us to do that. Sparky Sticks, sounds like a good time for Clank Nation to take over the Netherlands. Their soldiers hobbled by wooden shoes will be no match for our recurve bows and stirrups. We'll take over Porkfest. Nick Severin, Sticks, I went to the same high school as Stephen King. Oh, Jesus. Dennis the Menace. What about a neo-Nazi giving a speech about the evils of the Jews? Could this not be interpreted as speech intended to provoke harm against Jewish people? If not, at what point does it stop being protected? If it's general, there's no threat. There's no specific credible threat of violence. If that individual goes to the synagogue and starts parading and goose-stepping up and down the street screaming about how he wants to attack the synagogue, that's a credible threat. It has a specific person, place, or thing involved with it. That's the arbitrary litmus test that we use under the First Amendment. It is arbitrary, but generally it works. This is why I oppose HB 269 in Florida. And then the final news story, and please send no more super chats. I'll go through this fairly quickly. Funny story, couldn't leave it out. Gates works to end cannabis testing for military enlistment. Yes, Matt Gates, supposedly really far right. He looks a little bit like, the dude from The Shining. I can't remember the name of the character at the time. And he's trying to make it so that people can sign up for the military having used marijuana recently. I strongly support this. Marijuana is not the devil's weed. It should not be disqualifying. We don't test soldiers for alcohol. We don't say that, you've got a problem where you've picked up the bottle fairly recently. You got sauced before you went in for your military, your interview or whatever. You went in before you applied, and so you're not allowed to join up. No, if anything, people get sauced and then they get hoodwinked into joining the military. Why should it be any different with marijuana? Now, Gates is prefacing it on, hey, we've got a troop shortage. We need to ameliorate it. We can't keep preventing a good 20% of the population from joining up because they smoke weed at least semi-regularly. I take up a different tack. Fuck the drug war. Now, we give our troops benzos. We give our troops Dexy. We give our troops morphine. We give our troops every goddamn thing under the sun. And when they're out in combat, what do you think that a lot of those soldiers that were sent to Afghanistan to guard poppy fields were doing? Were they A, being stone cold sober, or B, experimenting with poppy pods because they could get away with it? I think probably in some cases B. In Vietnam, do you think that the soldiers didn't have access to marijuana? That's practically a fucking meme. A bunch of supposedly straight edge young kids going off and fighting communists, but they were blitzed out of their gourds. They were smoking weed. They were certainly taking, and this is canonical. There are so many reports from Vietnam especially that we don't have to second guess this. They were popping pills like fucking nuts. They were popping pills fucking constantly, leading to possibly several massacres in the process. Dextroamphetamine especially, which could cause irritability when you're withdrawing from it. So when the supply ran out, if they happened to be near a village, there were a few problems possibly. Benzos were given to pilots in Korea and Vietnam, also I think to an extent in World War II. Marching powder. The Nazis got everyone high. The US got everyone high. They still use drugs as performance enhancers regularly today. So what's the problem? They're going to smoke a little grass. And we're not even talking about active duty soldiers. We're talking about people having smoked weed and then given a drug test when they try to enlist. So if somebody smoked weed a couple of weeks ago, but then they're like, I kind of want to join the Navy or something, why the fuck should that be a disqualifying factor? Unless you believe in the severest drug war propaganda, who fucking gives a shit? So in other words, if you reinstate the draft, all everyone has to do is smoke a lot of weed and they're not allowed to be drafted. Then you would just put them in jail to sober up for 30 days so that they can finally pass the test, and then you drill them into the army anyway. That's the hypocrisy of the system. How dare you smoke weed? Dude, many nations have legalized weed and many states. Are you saying, by the way, wouldn't this be an equal protection issue? Equal opportunity for a government-funded, taxpayer-funded program, the U.S. military. You're saying that there's inequality between the people of Vermont or California versus the people of Kansas? Well, that sounds like it might be a legal problem. Perhaps Gates should consider doing that. That would be really funny. They try to make marijuana smoking an issue of the 13th Amendment. Probably do that. Jimmy B, looking for a funny weekend movie. Do you have a few recommendations? Watch Pineapple Express or anything with Cheech and Chong. While we're on the subject of weed, I figured I would guide you in the right direction. Sparky, lots of heroin addictions began in Vietnam too. Absolutely. And in Afghanistan. Anyway, I think that I'm going to go offline now. I've got things that I must do. I thank you to the nearly 5,000 people watching live. I will be back tomorrow. Hope that you enjoyed the show, as usual, with my various co-hosts here. That's about all. Peace out.